I'm Simon Briggs from SUSE. As you can see, I have a ridiculously long job title. Essentially, it means I specialize around OpenStack and help the sales engineering or pre-sales community in EMEA particularly, but globally as well, with how we go to market around our cloud solutions. I'm here today with my wonderful colleague. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Orhan Alisi. I want to first apologize for my voice. I've been ill for a couple of days when I have to cough. Sorry for that. I'm the sales engineer within the Benelux.
And what we're going to do today is talk to you about the capability that is within the SUSE OpenStack cloud solution for bringing on board multi-hypervisor support, particularly around VMware. Okay. What we're going to do is initially lay out why there is good logic in having a multi-hypervisor solution, why our customer base are often interested in VMware being proved out as a technology as part of OpenStack. And then we're going to walk through and particularly concentrate on the big things as architects you need to think about and accommodate in your architecture to avoid running into pitfalls. And the reason why this approach has been decided upon is in Europe, I was finding that customers were asking us to work with VMware. We were saying, yes, we can support it, it's fine. They were tending to do some work on their own and running into these cul-de-sacs. And they were just going, well, OpenStack's terrible. So I wanted to try and help educate people around that actually if you think about the pitfalls, it actually does work very well. So we'll walk through that. Okay. Initially, I'll hand over the clicker to Orhan, and he'll describe the logic around using VMware as a hypervisor in OpenStack Cloud.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, we have already talked about it for a long time, also this morning, about open and open source. As a company, we are an open source company, and OpenStack is, of course, an open source product coming from the open source foundation. Therefore, today, in the context, we are going to connect our open source environment in a rather closed source environment, which is the VMware environment. So, is it a new topic? Yes, of course, a new topic. According to Gartner, we have two types of IT. They call it bimodal IT. Do you know what bimodal IT is? Did you hear about it? Can I tell you something?
Some nodding, but do describe.
There are two types of IT environment. One is the Model 1, which is the legacy environment consisting of traditional virtualization and traditional hardware. And the Model 2 is the new agile DevOps environment consisting of a lot of flexibility, agility, and of course having close connections and things with cloud. Now, when we talk about clouds and about OpenStack, we talk rather about Model 2 IT, which is agile and quick. And having this kind of environments requires you a different approach because the old legacy traditional methodologies and tasks does not really fit in the new environment. So you have to industrialize a lot of activities on hardware level, but also on process level. I can tell you the process level is maybe more difficult than the hardware level. Once you have a cloud in your environment, it's technically easy to implement it, but having your organization adapt to cloud working methods is really a challenge for them. So therefore, industrialization with standardization is key if you want to go within this journey. And today, software-defined anything is key. Software-defined storage, software-defined networking, software-defined systems. And in that area, of course, OpenStack is the open source environment to build your own infrastructure as a service. But we have, as I said earlier, a traditional IT nowadays. Most customers where I come and talk with them, they have already almost invested heavily in virtualization technologies. Maybe just quick questions. Who is using today VMware?
That's quite lucky. They're in the wrong room.
Everywhere. Everywhere's VMware running. So OpenStack, I can tell you, is not a replacement for VMware. If you think about that, then I think you will go in the wrong direction. OpenStack will enable you to make use of the newest technologies in combination and cooperation with your current environment. Having said that, a business is not forced to make decisions to get rid of their old investments, because you have already invested massively in your current VMware environment. Moreover, your current system admins and also your current organization do not want to get rid of VMware. I haven't seen them. All kinds of sysadmins love VMware. Why? It has a very rich portfolio. You can do almost everything. But now the next step, being agile and complying to the DevOps module, we can come in with our OpenStack environment and integrate seamlessly with your environment. And therefore, it is unrealistic to say, let's get rid of VMware and put OpenStack. But that will not work. Technically not work, but also organizational, it will not work. And that's why we say we have to make a solution that new technology can plug in your current environment and make use of all the new technologies we will provide with the OpenStack environment. Last, in the OpenStack Summit, also in 2016, also Jonathan Bryce, one of the, I think, what was his role?
He's the chief executive for the OpenStack Foundation.
He recognized also this approach and this development in this area. And having said that, what is this?
I stuck an elephant in there.
An elephant? Why is that for?
So
I don't understand.
I learned something when I was building these slides. So I built these slides and invited Oren to come along and help me to break up the show. And in England, we use the phrase elephant in the room. I believe the Americans are familiar with this phrase. Some other nations may not be, one of which is Holland. So
I didn't know it.
Colleague over there, Dutch colleague over there. So for everyone who doesn't know, an elephant in the room is the wording you use to represent something that nobody really wants to talk about, but everyone knows exists, okay? And that's why there's an elephant in the corner, because most people think about OpenStack as being only for your new workloads, those non-traditional mode 2 workloads in your operation. Did I get?
Yeah,
right?
a bit. I understand it. So okay. Thank you for telling that. So there was a survey made last, and what we have seen that 93% of the respondents are using KVM. Normally, if you start from scratch and you want to have an OpenStack environment, most of the environments use KVM as a hypervisor. Because it is there, it does its function, and it works well, and that's proven. And only 8% of them using ISX. That does not mean that it's a small part, because, as I heard earlier, everyone is almost everywhere using VMware. So we have to do something about with that. And if you look about Docker, nowadays Docker is very hype, as you know. All kinds of companies want to use or are using Docker, but still it's only 9% in use. So we say, if you follow the model, think big, but start small. We say, if you want to implement an OpenStack environment, start with an environment which is applicable for new workloads, which is supporting the Agile and the DevOps methodology. We have a big experience in the most big environments where VMware is already running, and also integrating OpenStack solutions together with our customer, whether it's a proof of concept or already environments which are running full production. And by heart, I think BMW in Germany is a very big OpenStack user nowadays in combination with our technology. What offers VMware? So the integration with VMware ASXi is done via the Nova module within the OpenStack. And you can only connect to the VMware environment via vCenter. For doing that, SUSE introduced the VMware proxy server within the OpenStack environment so that all communication on all configuration works towards the VMware cluster is going through the proxy server to the vCenter. Later on, Simon will come with a couple of slides about that, how it works.
Yeah, because that does create a few challenges.
Yeah. If you look at the versions of VMware, it was already possible as of version 4.1 to connect your OpenStack to the VMware environment. However, there were not so lot functionalities available at that time because of the APIs. But as of 5.1, update 1, there are more rich APIs available so that you can do more functions from OpenStack toward the VMware cluster.
Can I quickly add something there? So I had a little bit of a panic about these slides. These were created, and Oren and I presented these to a community about 2 months ago. In between times, we've had a new version of OpenStack released upstream. So at the Barcelona OpenStack Summit 2 weeks ago, the Newton release was released. Now, I checked the documentation around VMware's position of supportability. And in the new version of OpenStack upstream, they are saying that you have to use version 5.1 update 1 to get integration with VMware.
For the Newton
for
release?
Newton.
Newton release.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
thank you for that. From the OpenStack view, all VMware resources are seen as one pool. Why is that so? Because the vCenter is still in control and the OpenStack environment is connecting through the proxy server towards the VMware environment. And as I said earlier, only one connection to the VMware environment is supported at the moment.
Officially supported. I have spoke to the VMware guys, and they say there shouldn't be a reason why it's a problem, but they do say in the documentation, officially, one cloud, one integration.
So this means, as I said earlier, all logic of OpenStack is done at the VMware layer through the vCenter connection we have, and the farm absorbed all the functionality in there. That is maybe nowadays, I don't know what the next developments are, but nowadays the functions are all absorbed by the VMware cluster. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So pitfalls and what's your steps, because you are more experienced with that.
Yeah,
please.
Absolutely. So do watch your step. Those traps are very nasty and they can give you a slight bit of bruising. The implications of what has been explained about the requirements that VMware stipulate to integrate them into your OpenStack cloud, we'll walk through what it means and how, as an architect, you might be able to get around those areas. So from an architectural point of view, if we're only allowed one integration point into VMware in one cloud, we're going to have a point of failure. So we need to think of that when we're architecting our solution. There are ways around that, and we'll talk about them a little bit in the how to respond section further down. Importantly, and it kind of goes without saying, but because we're integrating at the vCenter layer, vCenter takes the decisions of where to put the virtual machines into the hypervisor layer. So the hypervisors have to be presented to vCenter as clusters. So DRS has to be enabled on the vCenter layer for VMware to then decide where they're going to put the virtual machines at a hypervisor layer, okay? You can't pin your virtual machine to a physical ESX server. Again, the resource pool is all you see in OpenStack. So the size of the cluster resource available to you is all you see. You've got no delineation of what server is presenting what resources, okay? Also, the API for VMware integration into Nova does not expose all the capabilities in VMware vCenter, okay? So VMware have a very rich tool set. It's been said already, this is not a replacement for VMware. What they do is very good. Some of the things that they're able to do, there's no need for OpenStack to do. And in that case, you have to go into vCenter and manage your resources in there to get those added features, okay? So don't expect OpenStack to do exactly what VMware does. We've kind of stressed it twice, but if you want to do certain things, you have to go to the console. Okay. One thing that they do make very plain in their documentation, so their support position, and I'm here to represent what they would support. So if you're going to go into production, you need to know whether or not VMware are going to take a dim view of how you're using their technology. One of the points is, from their point of view, they do not want to see a vCenter that in the data stores, you are co-residing OpenStack images managed by OpenStack virtual machines and images that are vCenter managed. Their logic is that you will need two separate environments, one a cloud, OpenStack cloud vCenter integration and a separate vCenter if you want to run vCenter in its traditional mode, okay? Now you can argue that position with them. You are more than welcome to do so. It is their support position. And obviously, support positions can be reasonably flexible, but I need to highlight it. But the important thing about all this, if you are integrating vCenter into OpenStack, OpenStack has to be the single version of truth, okay? So for it to be able to manage the resources downwards, it has to understand everything that it's trying to achieve, okay? So don't put half your logic into the vCenter element other than those advanced little switches that we talked about earlier, and then leave OpenStack effectively blind to what you've done. And that's a mistake I've come across, okay? The idea that OpenStack must be the main version of truth then starts to have quite important ramifications when you think about how images are dealt with within OpenStack. So to explain briefly, in OpenStack, you create effectively a service catalog of the virtual machines that you make available to the tenants or user groups in OpenStack. That repository of those virtual machines templates, as they're called in OpenStack, is called Glance. That Glance repository is in OpenStack, but we've already said that the images need to travel through VMware to get down to the ESX level in VMware, okay? And that becomes a challenge. And importantly, the data stores that are underneath the vCenter have to be shared resources for DRS to be able to function effectively. What that looks like from an architectural point of view is at the very high level you have the OpenStack orchestration piece managing where virtual machines should reside. And the image store sits, in this case, to the left. And when a virtual machine is, or a template, is asked for by a tenant group in OpenStack, and a copy has to take place across the network that takes the template image of the virtual machine that you're going to start, and it has to travel down into a data store to then be available for ESX, okay? This is in itself one of the most fundamental mistakes people make. They don't account for the level of network traffic that you would get across this. The reason why I stress it so much is we've done quite a bit with guys wanting to integrate VMware and KVM into their OpenStack clouds. And often on VMware, you're running Windows virtual machines. Compared to Linux, they can often be quite heavy in physical size. And then you incorporate a copy down and then a copy back up, because obviously the data store needs to make the virtual machine available to the ESX server. And you're incurring latency you've not realized is there. In one particular case, we had a German customer where it took many hours to bring up their first image. And their assumption was OpenStack was terrible, okay? It's not OpenStack was terrible, it was actually we'd made a mistake in not explaining this subtlety to them, okay? So what do we do about that? Okay, well, we need to take into account that the image repository in OpenStack is based on Linux technology, and the data store in VMware is based on VMware technology. Okay, VMFS is the storage file system that you will be copying your glance images from and into. That copy must go across a network, but importantly, after the first time that copy is made, that is cached, okay? So that helps you quite a bit. But if you think back to the fact we were talking about clusters being delivered with DRS in VMware, you could actually find that one image is being spun up by a project in OpenStack, and the way that DRS is deciding, then it gets laid across. Say you've got a 4-node DRS cluster, then that image is spun up 4 times, but unfortunately it lands on a different ESX each time. So in the background, the data store has cached, so you lose some of the overall copy time, but actually the ESX servers will each incur a bit of delay, and you've got to factor that in as you're designing your architecture around this. The format is also important. So you can't just insert your format into the glance repository without thinking about how that image should reside in the data store, okay? There are tools in the open source community which will help you modify image repositories, images, to get them in the right format to be stored. And a lot of this information I've gleaned out of the OpenStack upstream documentation. So for real detail, do refer back to the documentation on the upstream to make sure you get the right build. There is also particular variables which become important when you take into account that caching, because the aging of the cache and how that cache is being dealt with from an OpenStack point of view can have an influence over that overall delay that might be incurred, particularly on the first iteration of an image being booted up, okay? And cache prefix value needs to be defined in your nova.conf to reduce one of those impacts. And it is recommended that in your data store, those images are booted as linked clones to glean the best effectiveness of VMware's capability to only really be bringing up a delta in effect on change. Okay? Sorry.
What about pre-caching? Is there an option to pre-cache Or, I mean, you could just, as the cloud administrator, just start up instances and say start up an instance on every, start up 10 instances if you have a 10-node VMware cluster.
Yeah.
And then it would start it up across all. Well, maybe it wouldn't. I don't know.
Well, yeah, like all caches, you can pre-warm caches, but if you're not aware of the architectural challenge, you're not going to take that into account. Now, as an operator, you're unlikely to know, but as an architect, if you build into the operational practice that you should be aware of how long the cache age is, there is some settings I mentioned a bit later on around that, the need to actually pre-warm to avoid very long delays. Obviously, it also goes without saying that as an architect, you need to encourage people to keep their images as slight as possible. So the idea of using technologies like JUICE, etc., limiting the overall size of the image that you're copying across, etc., will all mitigate this challenge. What this session is designed to do is to say to people who are architecting these solutions, think of ways around these, and it will work fine. I'm taking you down a road to talk about the pitfalls we've gone into, so it sounds a bit bleak at the moment. Don't worry, it does work. Just take these things into account when you're architecting your solution. Just to highlight, I probably won't jump to networking. There's something else that came to mind when I was going through this in my room earlier, and that's the single point of failure element you get from only being allowed one integration point for a cloud into vCenter. The way we've architected a solution around that is a little bit funky, but what we've done is place the OpenStack VMware proxy server that's in our architecture as a virtual machine into VMware, and then allow DRS to make sure that there's some high availability available for that link to vCenter. Sounds a bit crazy, but actually you get some resilience around that interface back to that layer, because obviously you're only allowed one integration point, but DRS will make sure that one integration point moves if there's challenges around where it resides. So that's a technology kind of consultative solution we've chosen to use around that. Oren did mention that actually things are changing. They are developing their code, so VMware are working on their technologies. They have OpenStack commitments. They do refine what they do. So, over time, one would expect that some of these challenges will disappear. Okay, but be aware they are there. Okay. Networking is also something within the VMware stack that you need to be aware of. And really it boils down to two major things. And this is kind of standard in OpenStack itself. So you can very easily define what is essentially a flat network in an OpenStack environment. I can see my fellow consultant grimacing with that idea, which is easy to deliver, fairly straightforward technology-wise, and in the VMware API instance, it actually integrates with Nova networking, which is nowadays seen as maybe an old-fashioned way of doing things, if there's such a thing in OpenStack, which you might not know is only 6 years old, so old-fashioned is a bit of a relative concept in that. But the other way of doing it, and certainly the way we would advise any architect to go, so we'd never talk to people now about flat networking really, is to use the OpenStack networking. The Neutron capability is the project that's called, and through that you're able to define your virtual networks that are available for your VMs on your ESX layer, to the point that you've got effective software firewalling from one virtual machine to another if you don't want them to see each other on a network layer in an ESX host. Okay. There are a couple of settings that we suggest, and certainly you have to apply some physical settings in your vCenter to make sure those networks are able to react to OpenStack traffic in the right way. So there's a couple of switches there you have to change. If you want these slides, they are made available, and a bit further on in the appendix, it actually shows you where to point and click in vCenter to go and change those things. We are hoping to make it as easy as possible. Importantly, the software firewalling concept that I was talking about is actually called security groups within OpenStack. And they are only available with the OpenStack networking capability, okay? So that's a huge limitation, and I would, even though VMware still support the Nova computing layer, talking to customers, I never ever recommend that. In there lies the route to madness, as far as I'm concerned. Just don't do it. So, there is also security implications. Obviously, I've talked to the fact earlier that on an ESX host, you're going to have multiple virtual machines. That's sensible. That's the great thing about virtualization. And you're going to have to do some security work around how they work in their environment. Importantly, to VNC into your Linux machines, if you want to do some admin into your virtual Linux machines that reside on those ESX servers, you've got to think about actually going into vSphere and making sure that the firewall isn't blocking those ports that VNC is actually going into. Sorry, were you going to say something?
VNC, can you tell us what it is?
Yeah, virtual network computing. So it's
remote desktop.
Yeah, it's a remote desktop capability for an administrator to get into the Linux node if for any reason you need to. I've never actually built a VIB. I'm not a VMware expert, but I am assured that that is something most VMware experts are able to do, and you would need to create that in the way defined in the documentation I highlighted earlier to make sure the integration works for the VNC. Don't expect it to work on first attempt if you haven't done that already. And in that documentation I'm pointing you at, there is a series or a table which defines the security code, the security definitions you will need to propagate down to the objects within your vCenter for it to work seamlessly. So rather than just talk through a table, I'm just pointing you to those things to direct you to do so. Okay, there's a few other things to mention. One of the really confusing things is if you work with OpenStack with KVM, and I will make a point about that quickly, what I thought of when Oren was talking. SUSE always recommends you look at both hypervisors if you're looking at putting vCenter in there as well. There are things KVM's good at, and if you look at it and it's good at it, do use it. It's there, it's part of the solution, it's easy to use. For what VMware's good at, also look at VMware. What you will see if you are doing that is that within VMware, when you apply your image into your Glance repository of images, you're able to build some logic about the naming convention of the virtual machines when they're spun up by your tenant groups. So there can be some logic in that naming. It's a bit shocking when VMware spins up and uses some random alphanumeric code for the instance. It shouldn't really matter, but that is something which confuses people when they see it happening. So why is there a bug here? It's just a facet of the API that is how it delivers itself. I'm sure they'll get round to fixing it, but it's not a great hill of beans, I think, from their point of view.
Does that mean there's no cloud init in the image? Sorry, I'm getting too technical, but cloud init, because cloud init handles a lot of that.
I believe Cloud Init is in the image. I think the API as a layer in between that confuses it, but I'm not absolutely sure.
No, VMware does not have Cloud Init.
Oh, does it not?
No.
Okay.
VMware today has its own proprietary technology.
And that's where the fault. So you're spot on, Michael. Well done. Thank you for your help. So it's a bit confusing. Strong. Yeah, they're moving forward. So strong recommendation that you reserve some memory in the Nova.com settings, just to make it more efficient at operating. And from a cache settings point of view in Nova.conf, there is a recommendation to, caching is quite interesting. We were talking about it in some training we were doing as a sales engineering community the other day. Don't expect to understand your caching requirements immediately. Often understanding the caching aging and stuff takes a little bit of iteration and experimentation. But be aware there's a couple of settings there that when set will help you manage your cache effectively, as it is such an important component around that storage challenge that we were talking about previously. Okay, so what does SUSE do around this? Well, first of all, we make very pretty little pictures. So that's me on my social evenings. And what we also do is make pretty pictures. So with our tooling, you might not be aware, but we actually use something called Crowbar to manage and deploy our OpenStack clouds. That allows us to deliver a capability to boot infrastructure into our environment and then configure it from a dashboard like this in a very drag and drop, WYSIWYG, intuitive technology methodology. As you can see there, down on the right-hand side, you've got a list of the available hardware that is available to be defined as resource. And then on the left, you drag and drop the element into the piece that is applicable for what you need. And there's a Nova Compute VMware element there with a machine in it. So it's been dragged and dropped into that area. And you also have a few variables you'd want to set. So IP, who's going to use it, passwords, etc. And it's as easy as that to integrate the tool once you've accounted for the architectural challenges. Okay? And it will work. Okay, just reinforcing the fact that you are using a proxy as an interface into the vCenter layer. Okay, and you've always got to focus in on that when you're architecting the solution. You don't get access. It's a very different thing when you're using any of the other hypervisors because there you're thinking about them as individual hypervisors. Okay? Okay, and what we're actually doing in the background, a very simple architectural diagram, which is illustrating the fact that we build our cloud through an admin server. That admin server allows us to deliver that dashboard we were looking at earlier. From that dashboard, we're able to drive down what we call the control plane of OpenStack. And that control plane, through a scheduler, allows us to pick up the multiple hypervisors we've got. Okay? So just to highlight, we are unique in the industry because it's not just the open source KVM and VMware, but we've also got full support for Xen, and don't believe the press, Xen hasn't disappeared. We've got lots of very happy customers using Xen and would like to carry on using Xen. So being the open source company, we help them. And that can be used in our OpenStack infrastructure. And also we've got a lot of customers running mainframes, and they would like a fully supported interaction or integration with their ZVM layer for resources being used within their Linux on their mainframes. What isn't included in this diagram, well, it kind of is with the Docker comment on the top green box on the left-hand side. But now with version 7 of our product stack, which was announced at OpenStack Summit, one of the major headlines there is we've got full integration for containers as a service through the Magnum capability of OpenStack, if you're familiar with the different projects that run within OpenStack to deliver the whole solution. So we've extended the power of being able to deploy containers via another orchestration technology called Kubernetes, which effectively allow you to make your containers very elastic as they respond to events. We've got a very good demonstration actually of that Magnum integration here this week down on the booth, if you want to come and talk to us about that. But that's an extra conversation beyond what we've all gathered in this room to do, which is to talk about the VMware integration. And as I said earlier, the appendices I've gathered together gives you some of the point and click instructions for what to do at the vCenter layer to get the networks established, the bridge, etc.
So can you go, please, 2 slides back? Because I would like to stress the point here that isn't it fantastic that you can have in one OpenStack environment compute nodes on VMware, ZVM, Hyper-V, and KVM-XN. So real openness. So if you need more power or more compute nodes, choose your own hypervisor platform. And nowadays, IBM System Z is very coming with the Linux One environment. You can easily spin up a lot of compute nodes on the ZVM platform, all centrally for one controlled OpenStack environment. And I like this picture really because it is really, really open. I think we are the only OpenStack distribution which supports those compute nodes all in the same version at the moment.
Yeah, and all in the same cloud.
Yeah.
No, that's the point really. You can mix and match. I often talk to my customers about placing the service that you want to deliver on the infrastructure that's right for that service.
And doing this way, as I said earlier, you don't need to replace VMware because that's not doable. VMware people like VMware administrators like VMware. You can't get the discussion that you will replace it. So this is an easy way to have entrance in that environment. I have a customer in the Netherlands. We do it in this way. They keep their VMware environment. However, we are now going to integrate OpenStack so that the Windows administrators now likes the way of working because their working area is now extended with new technology and new possibilities without abandoning their current environment.
And that's the strength of the OpenStack model, essentially. So any questions from the floor, comments from the floor, experiences from the floor? We have 15 minutes officially. You might get some of that back in your life, but if you want to make any points. Howard, how are you, sir? Very good.
So how do you separate those environments? I mean, say you want, I'm missing 30 minutes, but say you want a VM, how do you decide? Does it decide which hypervisor it first on?
Okay, yeah, good question. So you're saying how would the logic go for where a virtual machine would be placed? Okay, and it's different according to different environments. So in the Glance repository, when you inject your template image of the virtual machines that you run, you can pin those images to certain areas. That
Show the bar clamp. You can there choose a drag and drop to the right place. What?
Yeah, but that's not for the image.
Okay.
The image that you drive into your repository can be pinned to a certain kind of hypervisor or resource beneath. And that's really how you manage it. The other aspect in VMware is the fact the image actually is slightly different. So if you're using KVM, you're using QCOW2 generally. You have some options around that, but it's a favored image. And within the VMware, generally you'll be using VMDK images. So therefore, you very definitely can't spin one. Well, you can actually, but you wouldn't want to spin one into the other. So general practice is to have two distinct images, both the same, and pin one to one resource, one to the other. Interestingly, people may not realize that SUSE actually offer a completely gratis to use at the point of use service called SUSE Studio, where you can easily manage building your images for different endpoints or delivery points. So up in SUSE Studio, susestudio.com, all we get out of you is registering and giving us your email address, but we've probably already got that already. So up there you can go in and build SUSE Linux according to what you require, and then at the end of it, you can decide how you're going to build it and what you're going to run it on. And
which architecture?
Yeah, and it handles the versioning of that image. And if you want to run it and create it as a Zen image, a KVM image, and a VMware image, you can do all three things at the same time on the same version, okay? So obviously versions of control are an issue, version control is an issue when you're doing multiple images. And SUSE Studio can help around that for Linux. Gets a bit trickier with Windows. You can run Windows on KVM, perfectly okay. SUSE is very effective at running Windows images on KVM. Zen, we can help you around that. But people often choose to run it in VMware. So those images have to be designed and versioned according to the rules of Windows. Okay.
How about AWS? Do you provide integration for AWS?
The SUSE Studio build tool can build the same image for the hypervisors I just talked about, and also an image that can be driven out to your, you can actually put your AWS credentials in to that build tool and spin it out across into AWS. But actually within OpenStack, we've got no direct integration where you could choose to run an image across. Hybrid cloud is something we're very interested in, and we will be talking quite a bit about that in the future, but I can't pre-announce anything.
So no, I've tried to use the studio to just build an image, but from what I remember, there were some limitations with licensing before you can use
Yeah, well, what, licensing on the AWS side or licensing around how you use SUSE Studio? Right, so SUSE Studio, for those who are not aware, can be used as a public web resource, but if you feel there's IP in what you're building up there, you might actually choose to bring that resource in-house to also work inside your organization to protect that IP. And you get more capability than you would up in the public cloud. For instance, you can't build a KVM image, ZVM. You can build a KVM. You can't build a ZVM image up in the public cloud, but you can in your OpenStack on-premise version of the tooling. So there is certain things you can't do. The public cloud version is able to drive down to AWS. I don't know.
Azure also.
And Azure, yeah. I don't know the implications of your Amazon licensing. That is not something I've got into too heavily, to be fair. Hello, hello. We'll take, hand went up first. No, you're doing it, Rod.
I came through that didn't hear it.
Yes, yeah, that's fine. You can tell by the accent.
So after you sit down with the customer and explain all this, happy, sad at the end?
It's a tricky conversation, but as an architect talking to someone, I think it's a very important conversation. If there is potholes, then telling somebody to avoid the potholes is a lot better than letting them fall in the pothole and then saying, oh, I knew that was there. Do you want a hand out? So you have to go through the process. Importantly, VMware will get much better at what they do, and in time, these problems will go away and it will be a less difficult conversation. The headline, to keep it nice and fluffy though, is VMware have a good integration into OpenStack and they run as compute resources. They also have some, as a partner, they also have some very interesting technologies that support cloud. So there's software-defined networking solution, NSX, very powerful, and that can be integrated. And they also have their vCenter technology, which would be probably a competitor from SUSE's point of view around our Ceph-based SUSE enterprise storage. But as a partner, we often have competitive tools and mutual tools. That's just the nature of the thing.
So do the VMware guys feel they're losing control by just having this stuff being thrown at them from OpenStack? Is that part of the...
I experience some negativity from those who feel that traditional virtualization is enough and they don't recognize the values that are a step towards. Because for me, moving to a cloud deployment methodology is just a next step in a continuum, improving the capabilities of virtual. As Oren was explaining, virtual is great. You can pack more into servers. You get more efficient at it. It's more modular. You can move around those servers you're delivering more effectively. But at the end of the day, you're tending to do a very, I always talk about the artisan server build approach, where you build each VM for each requirement, and it's very stop-start. If you talk to the VMware or hypervisor operators and convince them that actually moving from that stop-start, very intensive process and moving to a much more software-defined solution is for them a benefit, because to be honest, your relevance to organizations is going to decline over time if you just stay in that stop-start mindset. Then you can win over those individuals and they can become great advocates of these kind of technologies. Make no mistake, software-defined is becoming very, very prevalent in the thought processes of people who are quite senior in organizations. The benefits in industrializing effectively the ability to deliver on scale in a dynamic manner can't be done without software defined. It's just not physically possible. And therefore, understanding it and being able to articulate it and deliver it is a skill all of us must be willing to absorb.
There's also needed a mind shift for the VMware administrators to work with the Linux administrators in this case. It's really a big challenge, but it takes time.
Yeah, because often the VMware sits within the Wintel side of the business, which is another challenge, but everyone's business is different, obviously. But it is part of the cultural thing we talked about. Right. Sorry, Mike, you were going to...
So what pitfalls have you run across? You had mentioned integrating VMware and KVM in an OpenStack environment. What pitfalls have you seen in trying to make those environments communicate over the software-defined networks that are created? And have you run across any pitfalls?
No, because if you define your network to be able to do effectively software-defined networking, however it's delivered, whether you're using NSX or you're using a third-party solution for software-defined networking as an overlay, or you're using Open vSwitch or whatever, as long as you define that correctly, then whether the VMs are residing in KVM or across in the environment on VMware, shouldn't be too much of a challenge. And it's certainly not been something that I work in a pre-sales mode, so I tend to prove out smaller models. From a consultancy point of view, they may have experienced more challenges, but it's not been big enough for them to feed back to me. I need to, because the way it works is a continuum, so I hand over to services teams, they deliver, they tell me what's going on, and I should get better at telling people what they should do. That's the idea, and I'm not getting much feedback that that's a challenge on the bigger scale production deployment.
But in your smaller proof of concept type
tends to work fine.
Integration, you spin up an instance and it comes up in VMware, you spin up another instance.
Well, the VLANs are available, yeah.
And this VLAN, we have
across.
problems with connecting the VLANs?
Shouldn't do. Integration of physical hardware technology is another aspect of our OpenStack. You were mentioning Cisco have the ACI integration on their physical kit, which we're integrating with in the latest versions of SUSE OpenStack Cloud. So sometimes there are challenges around how the software-defined network meets the fabric, but it's not per se the VMware that's the problem or the different hypervisors that are a problem. Yeah.
In my experience, the most time is consumed for the networking part in the beginning. Networking part for the VMware and the OpenStack environment in combination with the possibilities of your switch. One of the things I remember is about trunking. So you have to set up trunking for the switch. If you don't have it, then you have to have
you've got an immediate challenge.
Yeah.
But SUSE will help anyone walk through those networking. Part of our whole deployment methodology is to work with customers and explain to them what they need to understand and then work on the architecture of that network that they're going to do, because obviously you've got the physical fabric, which remains similar to what it is today. Then you've got a virtual fabric within your cloud, and you've got to make sure the two marry. Sadly, in OpenStack, so upstream, morphing what you've decided to do with your network isn't that easy. There's small things you can do, but on the whole, it's a reinstall if you want to change your network layouts, which is a challenge. We're looking at changing that, but at the moment, that is what upstream OpenStack has a restriction around. So be aware if you are moving to OpenStack, do work with us to try and understand initially what your network should look like, so you hopefully don't have to keep going through the loop of reinstallation. But it's not that scary. You must talk to us.
It's well documented.
Yes, yeah, and we understand it well. Sorry, were you going to ask a question?
You didn't mention anything about VIO, VMware's integrated OpenStack.
Yeah, because that is essentially their solution. So if you are using VIO, you're not integrating SUSE OpenStack Cloud with vCenter. You're using VIO.
Well, I guess the question is, if you had VIO, you could still, I mean, essentially VIO, isn't VIO essentially the VMware proxy that you have there?
No, VIO is a complete OpenStack distribution that sits above. It's not as refined as ours, and it's probably, I don't know how strongly VMware sell it, but as I understand it, and I'm not an expert in their technologies, so I don't want to do them bad, but we have a very rich technology stack with lots of functionality. We support more projects in the OpenStack community, all those different things. They do have an OpenStack that they can put on top of their vCenter. You'd need to talk to VMware about how to integrate that, but it is more than just that proxy. It's called an OpenStack, so it's got the other projects involved. So. But you can only use VMware hypervisor with VIO. You can't supported integrate other hypervisors in the background.
So is the VMware proxy the thing that VMware contributes to the OpenStack community?
VMware contribute to the OpenStack community in different ways. They are an OpenStack contributor. They contribute in different ways. Interestingly, getting into the VIO conversation, I don't know if you realize you've actually got to buy NSX and vCenter for it to, vSAN for it to work. So they are expecting you to commit completely to their stack, as well as only being able to run ESX hypervisor in there. But they do work upstream. They have open source developers who are working upstream in OpenStack. Contributions-wise, they are there, and they do work. Whether they get OpenStack as much as companies like us could be argued, but that's their way of approaching things.
Okay. Last question.
Yeah, Eric, were you going to throw something out there, or was it just scratching the... Sorry. Okay, so thanks everyone. There was some nice questions coming back from the floor. Thank you for